Hello, everyone out there in YouTube land. This is the Triad Psych YouTube channel, and today we're going to discuss about the expert witness work we do at Triad, and I'm going to speak to one of my colleagues about her work, which runs parallel to some of the expert work we do at Triad. So we're here with Nakita Robinson. How are you?
Hello, I'm doing well.
Good.
Hello, everybody in YouTube world.
YouTube world looking at us right now. It is Friday afternoon in the South. And Nakita and I have known each other on and off for several years. We've gone to different schools together for a while, where we'd bump into each other at meetups and trainings and the such. And we just keep seeming to keep finding each other and bumping into each other one way or the other. So Nakita, tell us about yourself and how you want to make your foray into expert work.
Yes. So I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. So what that means is my training comes from a systemic lens when we look at treating and working with individuals that have mental health diagnosis or challenges in their lives. So the work that I do is centered in the public health world. So I work in the state of Georgia, where I monitor all the state-funded crisis programs for Metro Atlanta. So a lot of that is policy reviews, interpretations, even policy reviews, interpretations, and also an advocacy work. So I'm always connecting with stakeholders in the communities, like our hospitals, our jails, and just anybody who touches the lives of someone who has experienced some mental health illness in our community.
Sure. So not only are you a helping professional, but you have to make sure that their needs are being met and their rights are being met, that the rights aren't being violated also, that there's certain standards of care and guidelines for care for people who have mental illness, especially ones who are dependent on what we call the system, which would be personal care homes, nursing homes, probably emergency facilities, psychiatric hospitals. So let's talk about your regulatory work there and what you do with that.
Yeah, so within our department, we receive a lot of constituent complaints from everyday people who have interfaced with someone in the helping profession, and we're dissatisfied with their experience. So a lot of times what we are doing is providing education. We are looking into some of those complaints to whether it's educating the person about a process if they feel like they're meeting dead ends when trying to navigate mental health, because it's such an expansive world that people are really new to at this time. Imagine the difficulties trying to navigate healthcare. Now times that by 10 when you're trying to navigate mental health, because a lot of people are not aware of the resources that do currently exist and are trying to become more antiquated with it, as well as trying to navigate the hardships that they may be experiencing, that we are able to connect them with those resources and help them. And the other side of it is sometimes having those tough conversations with the providers that we contract with to navigate those challenges that our stakeholders experience and try to make it a better experience for them, so that the customer service is much better in the mental health world. I think right now, a lot of people are starting to experience a decline in the customer service aspect of it. And so we're really focused on trying to make sure that when stakeholders are connecting to treatments and services, that they're, even if they don't get the results that they're looking for, they are having a better experience.
Right. Now, have you ever engaged in disciplinary actions against some of the vendors in this space, personal care homes or nursing homes or something in between?
I have not led those charges, but I have been in tandem to witness the results of what happens when somebody does take advantage of an individual or does not treat them ethically. A lot of times we have contracts that are either removed or taken away. Funding may be taken away from a provider. There's a lot of investigation that goes into looking into those incidents. And those are big big results. Sometimes it may be an individualized situation where it's one particular staff member, and then those are usually mitigated internally with that organization, where then that staff member may be removed from the company.
I used to do a lot of consulting work to personal care homes here in Georgia, and I really don't do it anymore. And one reason I don't do it anymore is I found that, and it's been a while, I know things have gotten better since I was in it, that, for lack of a better word, some of the people who got into that business, if you want to call it a business because you're caring for people, didn't really understand the demands of it. They didn't understand how difficult this would be. They see it as a way to make money, and you're very regulated, and it's not. I've seen a lot of bad stuff happen. I've seen people mistreated as well. And so, dealing with personal care home operators can be quite tricky as well. So if I'm an attorney and I've been approached by a client who said to me, my daughter, my son was at a personal care home and I feel they were abused, what would your role be as an expert in that type of situation? What could you do for that case?
Well, a lot of times, what we defer to or look at is to see, one, we verify that the person was a client of that personal care home, right? We want to see documentation of the exchange and transaction and services, right? So, did you pay to live in this space? Was there documentation of your arrival? And in that, what came up as needs of the individual while they were in the care of the personal care home. So what did they identify the responsibilities of the personal care home? What does the guidelines say the responsibilities of a care home provider are? Not just in what do they provide to the individual, but what kind of staffing do they have? What are they not allowed to do? Some personal care homes are, well, most of them, depending on how you're classified, they're not allowed to distribute medication. Yet you'll have some personal care homes where the owners will take liberties and holding on to individual's medication and distributing it to them. So a lot of times it's really just looking at the fine print on how that personal care home is licensed. And if they are licensed, what are the regulatory backings behind that? I think oftentimes in these situations, what you do find is that a lot of these homes are unlicensed, and
I didn't know you could have unlicensed personal care homes. Talk a little bit more about that, because I had no idea.
Yeah, well, they may call themselves a personal care home, but legally they're not allowed to if they are unlicensed. They can only call themselves transition homes, or just say that they're a group home, but they cannot legally classify themselves as a personal care home. So language is key. And
language really is key in these situations. That sometimes, when there's a contractual dispute, I some of my expert witness work is in critical incident response with police departments, and the words in the police department's policy can make or break a case. Does it say an active shooter must enter the building or may enter the building? There was a huge school shooting case, and the whole thing hinged on that wording, that the school resource officer did not make entry to the building, and there was moved to prosecute him. But the department policy said SROs may enter the building, not must enter the building. Yes, that verbiage makes a big difference.
It does. So you always want to check whatever contracts you sign with this home that your loved one resided in and see how they classify themselves. Did they name themselves a personal care home? That gives you leverage to say, okay, they falsely advertised what they were. Or did they use alternative language in the documentation and did classify themselves as a group home or transition home or any of the other language that they like to use? Because then that does give them the leverage to say, you signed this document and you acknowledged that you knew that we were not a personal care home. And then other things to check for, and you really, in it, I think initially when we are looking into these places and establishments to help our loved ones, you want everything that you discussed in person to be written down in paper. So if you discuss that they said they were going to help them with their medication by distribution and watching them take it, then it needs to say that, not that the person would take it themselves. And, maybe we might check once a week to see how many pills they have left or not. I mean, things like that. You want to also make sure that the language says they have access to the kitchen when they want, that the fridge is not held at lock and key, or the kitchen is not locked down where they can't enter. You don't want your loved one going hungry and having to wait for somebody with a key to give them permission to eat. Other things to check for is when you're doing a physical tour of the space, see how the other clients move around the room, see if they have a desire to move around the room, see if the bedrooms are locked from the outside versus the inside, see if they have freedom.
What are the regs around that? Because when I would consult to personal care homes, it was always around clinical aspects, and overt behaviors. And then sometimes it would cross into, like you said, more or less restrictive environment issues. That one interesting case I had was that we had we called them consumers in my day. I think now they're called individual. What's the current terminology for residents?
And help seekers or
Health seekers.
individuals. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the individual, the PCH operator brought me in as it was as an expert. It did not go to court against actually your agency. We're going back a long time ago, and the operator had the individual wear a pair of overalls, not coveralls, overalls backwards, because he had an issue with putting his fingers someplace he shouldn't. And the state said, well, you're violating his rights. I took a look at it clinically, and I felt it was the right thing to do to stop him doing harm to himself, because he would engage in self-interest behavior with his fingernails and parts of his body he shouldn't have been. And, we did kick it around, and in the end, the state agreed to allow that intervention to be in place, as long as there was a plan to eventually make that extinct, which there was. That I said, no, we don't expect him to wear this, to wear reversed coveralls forever. But the more he wears it, the more he's going to develop replacement behaviors, which I gave him. Other things he can do with his hands to stretch and scratch, other tangibles, manipulatives he could use. And that was very interesting work.
Mm-hmm.
But again, sometimes if I get contacted, I can only comment on clinical aspects of a personal care home case, but not on policy and regulation. That'd be more your role. So essentially, if a parent or a guardian feels that an individual or their family member has been abused or not treated right, and there might be litigation in a personal care home, they might contact you to see if it's worthwhile pursuing a case, or a lawyer who gets the case may contact you too.
Yeah, and I think we have to recognize the subjectivity of mental health, and that when those clinical decisions are being made, who's the clinician helping them drive those decisions, right? Is it just the parent? And if it is a parent of an adult, does that parent have the authority? So do they have guardianship of this adult to make those decisions on their behalf? Because then if they do, then that is in and of itself the help seeker saying, yes, I agree to this intervention being made. But if it's at the sole discretion of the group home owner, then that's a totally different story to navigate, because you're trying to figure out, how did they come to that decision? And was there any plan in place for that decision to then evolve into something else? In what direction were they planning to go with it? And what expertise led them to that decision?
Right.
So you definitely want to make sure that on either side of the fence that you're at, that if there's a clinical decision being made, then you have a clinical person there helping guide you through that decision.
I worked for a personal care home very briefly. It did not go well. And I remember they said, we want to bring you on. One of the requirements was they would have my signature on a stamp, that they could stamp my signature on forms with my credentials on it. And I said, absolutely not. You cannot rubber stamp my signature anywhere. I think my role was called a PRMP. I don't remember what that acronym meant, like something that you were a clinician and you could help make these decisions. But I think what you're bringing up is critical. There has to be a degree of subjectivity too. That I remember in one situation I had, there was a very arcane law about psychological meds and how long an individual could be on them. But or the regulation, I should say, not the law, but when the regulation was written, it was before the advent of SSRIs, which Prozacs, you're talking your Prozac, you're talking your Zoloft, you're talking your Lexapro, that people can be on them for very long periods of time, sometimes their whole lives, but no one had changed the reg. And I remember, like you said, I often would referee between the policy with someone coming in from the state, the personal care owner, and then me saying, look, taking the person off of Prozac, even coming up with a plan to get them off of the Prozac is not in their best interest at all, as long as it could be documented and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So I think a lot of times you want to be sure that when you enter into some of these agreements with a helping professional, whether it's a clinician or a group home or a personal care home, that it is always a collaborative effort. There's not one person, unless you are the help seeker, that is making the final decisions, that everybody is, providing their best expert experience into the process and what the decision is going to be. And then, of course, the help seeker themselves deciding without being coerced on what is the best decision for themselves.
Talk about the role right now, if it has a role, of person-centered planning in terms of how you operate every day in that space.
So when we look at person-centered planning, we use the language of the individual. We use the language and how they identify what their goals may be, and we help them formulate a plan based off of what their desires and motivations are. I know oftentimes I am met with well-loving family members who have their own idea of what their loved one's recovery should look like. And that may not be exactly what that loved one, that help seeker wants for themselves. And we have to respect that. We have to respect the autonomy of the individual, as much as it hurts to see them not choose a path that you think is best for them. We all have our own paths and journeys in life. And sometimes it comes with its own twists and turns that we don't expect, but everybody else kind of saw coming. But it's part of our journey and our experience. So we have to give the same respect to help seekers in this world. You do want to give them the best guidance that you can, but you do want to allow them the self-confidence to make these decisions and to know that they have your support, but that you are going to give them the best guidance, but allow them to choose their way.
It's funny you bring that up, because I have a patient right now who's staying in a personal care home and has supported employment, an older woman with autism. And the session last night was that she can't express her needs directly. She has tremendous anxiety. So she breadcrumbs. And I think part of the problem with her duress or her anxiety, what brought her to me, was that she couldn't directly, even though she's fully verbal and she's intelligent, she didn't or can't or doesn't have the skill set to express her needs. So people are kind of guessing. They're throwing darts at a board, hoping something will stick. And what I do, my role is I interpret what she's saying and I connect the dots. Here are the breadcrumbs she's laying. What is she really asking for? And then, we do that work with her, and then, we come up with a plan for that. So it's important that their needs are listened to. Like you said, that when I entered the field in 1993, I mean, it was pretty unilateral that the professionals would decide what was in this person's best interest. And that was that, especially in the developmental disability space. But it was not a good approach either.
Mm-mm. No, and I think in today's age, we are recognizing that individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities do not lack knowledge about who they are or what their wants or needs are. It may be different than what you feel should be, but with respect and with concern of their safety, of course, you want to allow them to decide for them what kind of life they want to live. And support that as best as you can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, looking at what their preferences are, their intrinsic motivation is really, really critical. And there's also a need for clinical intervention too. I think also, you have person-centered planning, you have policy-centered planning. Sometimes you have clinical-centered planning, but I think too often in the field, someone thinks it's all or nothing. You can come up with a hybrid with all three merged into one. And so
Yes.
that could work well. So if does this regulate it all into nursing home work? Because I know that the line between a personal care home and a nursing home is they're close to each other, but they're still different.
They're very, very different. The nursing home requires an assessment to even determine whether you fit the need, fit the criteria for that level of care is considered pretty intensive because literally you have someone caring for you all day, every day. They're monitoring the medications that you take. They're monitoring what you eat. They're monitoring what you eliminate. They're monitoring all aspects of your life. And with some degree of subjugation, depending on how mobile the person is or how sick they are. But to any degree, they are definitely the caretakers of that individual. And, you have some that may do well. You have others that, like you alluded to in the beginning, that are really there for the paycheck. And that's, very unfortunate because you're dealing with a very vulnerable population where they may have their wants and desires, but don't have the skills or may have a disability that prevents them from expressing it in a way that someone else would be able to understand. So that's where we have those health proxies come in, or even a guardian of that individual to be able to speak up and speak for the desires of what that individual would want, what quality of life they would want. And again, it goes back to collaboration. Any of these entities that you are looking to receive help from, it should always be a collaboration between you and the help provider. It should never be this hierarchical dynamic where they're telling you what you need to do and you have no say in what kind of life you want to live and what kind of treatment you want within the realms of keeping you safe, right? Because I'm always going to kind of say within the realm of keeping you safe, and anything that I say does not take away that piece. Safety is key, and we always want to keep people safe. But within the realm of that, what type of life does this individual want to live, and how can we respect that? I think that where there is conflict at times is when you have the licensed facilities, they do have guidelines and credentialing agencies that tell them certain metrics that they have to keep. And because of that, they have certain metrics that they need to meet every day when it comes to individuals that are receiving help from them. And it has to be documented. So you want to understand what those metrics are, what they're going to be documenting or have to document, what type of touch points they have to have at minimum versus at maximum, and really see it and see if that's good enough for you, right? Yeah. As a help seeker, is that something that you want from that particular provider?
Right. So it sounds like, again, mean, you and I have extensive work, and you and I both have extensive experience in personal care homes. But I think, with you, you've got both the clinical aspect plus the policy aspect. You see, so I think that's where also you could be very useful to an expert or a parent or a guardian who needs to know what to do. And how can people get a hold of you if they want to hire you, retain you as an expert?
Yeah, so you can visit my webpage is epistamai.net, EPISTAMAI.net. And there you will find all my other contact information. It's pretty easy to navigate.
We'll put
So I don't want to make it any more difficult than it needs to be.
We'll put it in the comments section of the video.
Yeah.
Well, this was great. Thank you so much, Nakita, and we'll be signing off. And thank you for watching. We hope this was helpful.